Welcome to Generous Theology with Chuck and Brock. The fellows are talking today from Chapter 19 by Professor Cecilia Trefogli from the book, The Cambridge History of Medieval Philosophy.
And we'll get started for today. We have a second chance to talk about this really interesting chapter on change and the time, place, context, and to just recap what I took away from the chapter at a high level, because unfortunately it's tough to just jump in deep water. And so a little bit of setup always needs to happen. And I wish it was easier to just jump into the good things and the deep things. But what I really took that I appreciated is that medievals really thought about a very subtle, interesting, and nuanced topic. And ultimately, without me pointing a finger of blame, because I don't think I would have done better. I'm certain I would have not been a great thinker in the Middle Ages. But I really do get the sense that this idea of change and motion remains untied in this sort of theory of everything that's dominated the philosophy of medieval thought. And I know you mentioned that as well. And I think there's a lot of different categories and dimensions there. But before I maybe wanted to talk about why I think that was defeated, and I promised this time to get into the teapot, because I did say I was going to get into it last time and I didn't. So I do want to spend some time with the teapot. But I first just wanted to check in with you and see, is that kind of where you maybe came to the conclusion as well? Or what were the other factors there that affected your thought?
Absolutely. It was really interesting. And certainly this was part of, I think, Trefogli's thesis, that there never really was a settled way to think about a number of these issues. There was, throughout medieval times, there was a variety of different ways of thinking about it, disagreement back and forth. But it is really interesting as to how much and how a lot of the really important names that have continued to come up in our study of medieval philosophy, whether it's the Arabs and whether it's the ancients like Aristotle, whether it's people who were European philosophers of that, William of Ockham and then Thomas Aquinas, is really interesting how much those names keep coming up and how much they're involved in this discussion. And especially to me, and I don't know, maybe we'll get a little bit into this a little bit later. We spent some time in the 19th century and looking at 19th century philosophy. And a lot of topics in 19th century philosophy, I don't remember these kinds of things, just the nature of change and time, place, being as key and as argued about. Now, I don't know whether that's because there had come at some point to be a way that most philosophers thought about it. Perhaps that's true, but I get the impression that perhaps that isn't necessarily the case, and rather instead ideas about change and place and time, that they become more, they don't have the priority of place. And perhaps there is a sense in which that is because of, especially in the 19th century, this move away from thinking of the world as created and thinking of a creator and creatures, and such a focus on simply the individual human or human's ability to make their own sort of context. And yet time and place, we don't, other than perhaps in the thought that they're just in the mind, we don't really create those things. And I don't think we can really, other than maybe making the argument, we don't really talk about them. It is really interesting to have these very interesting discussions in this specific context.
And the thing that I like, trying to think of an edifying way to put it, is I guess one of the banes of my own scholarship, my own lifetime of investigation, is that it's hard to find treatments of the material that aren't too aggressively partisan. So for example, if I get with some Kantians, there's just the ground rules are no dogmatism. And what happens to be dogmatism? Of course, my Christian beliefs. And I'm out of the club. But then, unfortunately, I've found the same thing often in Christian circle, where I cite Calvin, I cite Turretin, I cite Luther, and then later on I cite Kant, and someone from the Calvinist club comes up to me and says, "Hey, you're not in our tribe. You're one of those aggressive, modern, compromised, fallen Christians." And they'll flirt with the line of calling such studies heretical or apostate. And that's been difficult. And so I appreciated this treatment. And I appreciated the fact that philosophers from the Greek tradition, from the Latin tradition, from the Islamic tradition, all had something to say and all brought something to the table. I'm not saying that everybody was right, but you can't be educated on this topic if you just decide, I'm not even going to allow investigations into the Islamic thought or Jewish thought. I'm not even going to look at that, or I'm going to ignore the Latin, or I'm going to ignore what Protestantism has to say about these things. That partisanship is very difficult. And this treatment, this material was really high quality for its breadth. And I almost am to the teapot, but I think this is worth striving together with I don't know what the right venue is, Chuck. I'm trying to reach for this. I almost wish there was like a game of causality, like there is a game of chess, where we could, in a friendly game sort of environment, engage with other people who have different thoughts about how to think about ideas of causation, have an arena where we could talk it out and have winners and losers and have upvotes and downvotes or whatever it is to advance so the cream can come to the top. But then at the end of the day, I want to defeat my opponent in chess, but that doesn't mean I wish them any ill will or have any malice or adversarialness after the game's over. And so I wish we had that sort of situation here in theology and philosophy when we could talk about these things, because it feels like we are all on our own group of islands. Okay, I'm having a brain situation here. What is a group of islands called again? An archipelago?
An archipelago, yeah.
Yes, I feel like I'm on my Protestant or my Reformed archipelago, and I feel like my Kantian buddies are on their continental archipelagos, and the same thing for the Islamicists, the same thing for Jewish thinkers. And I'm really looking for interaction together, and I think until we get there, this is going to be such a dense topic to penetrate in a meaningful way. I don't know that we do get there, Chuck.